Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We are on 88B, Pei Ches Amud Beis. Nice to see a big crowd. Good to see you all. Okay. Okay, so we are... where are we? No, just kidding. We are, just kidding. 88B1. Okay, 88B1, Pei Ches Amud Beis, in the beginning. So the last thing we discussed was Machlokas Rabbah and Rav Zera about the function of the 4 amos in the public domain. The reason that the Mishnah said, right, that if it's 4 amos, then if it's less than 4 amos, then a person's not allowed to do so. So Rabbah said that the reason is because of the fact that a person wants to do ziluf. They want to sprinkle the water to make their garden look beautiful, their courtyard look beautiful. And Rav Zera said the issue is that when it's larger than 4 amos is allowed, because then the 2 sa'as, which is the typical usage of water over Shabbos, is going to be absorbed when it's 4 amos and more. Okay, so the difference between them, the Gemara said, is if it's narrow, meaning if it has the amount of area to absorb 2 sa, meaning let's say it's like 8 by 2 or something like that, then not 4 by 4, then Rav Zera would say that's fine, because at the end of the day, there's enough area over here to absorb 2 sa, whereas Rabbah would say, no one cares about a courtyard that is that narrow. In other words, the whole issue is beautification. And if it's a very narrow courtyard, it doesn't matter anymore, right? In other words, Rabbah's whole issue is that 4 by 4, this is a courtyard that people pay attention to, people are going to be careful about, but if it's narrow, then people are not going to pay attention to it, even if it has the right area. Okay, that was the distinction between Rabbah and Rav Zera. Good? Any questions before we go in? No? Good. Okay. Says the Mishnah. So we're going to try to prove both views. So it's not. We're in the middle of the first column of 88b1. It's not. Chatzar v'achsadr mitzdarfin la'arba amos. The Mishnah said that a courtyard, a chatzar, the courtyard itself, and the portico, okay, so like this open patio, they combine to be 4 amos. Now the Gemara assumes that we're talking about a scenario where this is not squared. In other words, it says a courtyard. So, for example, you have, something like, I'll give you a terrible picture, bear with me, but basically you have a courtyard. This is the porch, okay? This is the porch thing, and it has, whatever, This is the porch, and this is the courtyard, and they kind of go together, right? It opens up into a courtyard, and so the Mishnah said, if this is your space, and again, your house is like over here, obviously the house is not combined because you can't pour anything in your house. This is the house, okay? So bottom line is this together, the Mishnah said, it combines. If this is 4 amos together, then it's going to be enough space, okay? Now, that would only seem to make sense according to Rav Zera. Rav Zera says what you're looking for is enough surface area to absorb 2 sa, right? According to Rabbah, this is too small, because it's not like a nicely configured space, presumably, no one would care about making this beautiful, and therefore the whole concept of I'm pouring it to let the dust rise wouldn't apply in such a case. Right? Because the fact that it's not, again, we're saying that if it's a Brooklyn front yard, like no one cares. It's too small, or if it's weirdly shaped, no one's going to care. That's the Gemara's question. The Gemara is ultimately going to answer, I'm just going to jump ahead because I'm standing already. The Gemara ultimately answers, no, they actually are perfectly combined. In other words, we assumed it was some weird shape like this, which would be a little bit more typical. We're saying, no, it's a wide portico, it's a wide porch, like a patio area, and the courtyard aligns with it perfectly, so there's actually 4 by 4, and since it is a nice squared space, people do care about making it nice, and therefore, even according to Rabbah, that part of the Mishnah would not be a question. Make sense? Okay, so let's just read that inside. It's not chatz v'achsadim and starfin arba amos bishlam Rab Zera. This fits Rab Zera because again, his issue is only that there's enough surface area to absorb the water. El Rabba kasher, according to Rabbah, if it's not squared 4 by 4, then a person does not really care to dampen the ground to lift the dust off. So the Gemara says, Targum Rab Zera aliba de Rabbah. Rab Zera answers according to Rabbah. Okay, it's always nice when you see that, right? There's not a personal question. Rab Zera is the one who's there when that question was posed. Rab Zera says, I have an answer for my opposition, for my opponents, right? And he says, he says, we're talking about a portico which goes entirely, which runs across the entire face of the chatzar, meaning it actually, like I just drew, it's 4 by 4. Okay, now the Gemara is going to try to supports Rabbah from a brayso. Tashma, chatzar she'ein ba arba amos al arba amos in shofchin lesocha mayim b'Shabbos. If the courtyard is less than 4 amos by 4 amos, you do not pour water into it on Shabbos. Okay, so until now, in our Mishnah, all the Mishnah said was that it has to be 4 amos. So Rabbah said it has to be 4 by 4, and Rav Zera said no, it has to be as long as it has the area of 16 amos, that's going to be okay. But it doesn't have to be 4 by 4. This brayso says explicitly it has to be 4 by 4, right? So this goes to like the opinion of Rabbah, who says you're looking for a beautiful courtyard, a nice courtyard where you care about sprinkling water on to get the dust out. But if it would be a different configuration, even if it would be the same amount of space, same amount of area, it would not work. So this is obviously a question. According to Rav Zera, that's the Gemara says, Bishlam the Rabba Nicha, this fits according to Rabbah. El Rav Zera Kasha, according to Rav Zera, this Bryce is going to be a problem. Samar Lecha Rav Zera, Hamani Rabbanan. So Rav Zera says, this is actually the view of the Rabbanan. Now we're actually going to be revisiting our Mishnah, and we had a part of our Mishnah which we didn't explain fully, and now we're going to go back to explaining it. So if you recall, we had a machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov about pouring water into a drainage pipe in one's domain. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, as long as it's covered by, as long as there's a 4 amma area that's covered, as long as there's a 4 amma by 4 amma area that it could go into, then you're good. What did the Rabbanan say? The Rabbanan said, no, if you have a drainage pipe, even if it goes like 100 amos in your property, it's still not going to be okay. Okay, what was the basis for that machlokas? Okay, we're going to revisit that discussion right now. Again, the machlokas was, just have to be clear on the machlokas. According to Rabbanan, if you pour water into a drainage pipe in your yard, it doesn't matter if it goes for 100 amos, it's still going to be problematic. It's still going to be aser. Okay, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, no, as long as there's an area of 4 by 4, it's going to be okay. What is that machlokas about? So Rav Zera wants to suggest that the machlokas is like this. That Rav Zera says, Hamani Rabbanan. He says the brisa which said that it has to be 4 by 4 is actually the view of the Rabbanan. Why would the Rabbanan say you can't pour water into a conduit, into a pipe that goes for 100 miles? 100 miles in your. I'm in my private domain. I pour water into it. They say you can't do that. Why can't I do that? So let's think about this. What would be wrong? At the end of the day, the water is going to be absorbed over there. It seems like they're saying the real issue, the real permission to pour water into something is only when it's going to help remove dust. Only then is it going to be permitted. Now, when I'm pouring something into a pipe, a drainage pipe, I obviously don't care about it looking nice. It's a drainage pipe. In other words, when you're pouring it into like a yard, okay, then you're going to have the question of like, is it the right dimensions? And then I could say, I'm doing this to remove the dust, and therefore, even if it pours off, it's going to be okay. But I'm pouring into a drainage pipe, since I don't have the dust intention, it's impossible since it's a drainage pipe. I don't care to make my drainage pipe look pretty. It's a drainage pipe. It's literally a disgusting, nasty thing. So basically what we're doing now is we're reinterpreting the machlokas in the Mishnah, and we're saying the Rabbanan who said that I can't pour it into a drainage pipe at all, they were saying the reason is because the only permission I'm allowed to pour something in my yard is only if I'm able to, if there's a possible interpretation that I'm doing it for the dust, then I say, okay, it's inadvertent, it's secondary that the water drains off. But when it's going into a pipe, and there's no dust factor, it's aser, right? And so therefore the Mishnah, the Brisa, which has to be 4 by 4, that's Rabbanan. Because now we're saying the Rabbanan are the ones who hold that it has to be 4 by 4 because they're the ones who focus on dust. Umas Nisin, and our Mishnah, the opening line of our Mishnah, which just said has to be 4, didn't say it has to be 4 by 4. It said it has to be the area of 4 by 4, but it could be any configuration. That's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the one who holds that it's about absorption. So basically, Rav Zera now is coming out, telling us that his view was going like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and now we're interpreting our Mishnah to actually say, according to Rav Zera, the Mishnah is actually arguing the same machlokas Rabban and Rav Zera are arguing. Yes?
Sorry, this might be really not a very good question, but so is this because it's biblical versus rabbinic? Because like you can take out muksa if it's nasty, right? Your trash, if it's like really, but like this is like sewage, like you can't get it out of your house, and that seems like a like why can I don't know.
Right. Look, taking discussing things at your house is a special dispensation for a very particular law called muksa. In other words, it doesn't apply to anything. I wouldn't say it's because rabbinic versus biblical, although that's true. It's that when they developed the ideas of muksa, they built in a special dispensation. It only exists within muksa.
Okay, so that's specific for that.
Yeah. Okay. So again, let's just go back to our Mishnah. The way Rav Zera is understanding our Mishnah, Rav Zera is the one who says that the issue was about absorption. He says it's all about absorption. It has the right area. That's what everything is about. The challenge is that we have a brisa which says explicitly has to be 4 by 4. That can't be about absorption. She says you're right. Really, there is a machlokas tanaim. Really, there is a machlokas among the generation earlier about this particular question. It's not really me and Rav Zera, Rav Ria and Rabbah arguing about this. Really, in the Mishnah already, they're arguing about this. And the way to read the Mishnah is as follows. Opening line of the Mishnah says it has to be 4 amos. It doesn't say 4 by 4. So what's that all about? If it just doesn't matter the configuration, then it's all about absorption, right? If it's not 4 by 4, it just has to be that space, that area, then it's all about absorption. And then a few lines later in the Mishnah, we have Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan arguing about pouring into a drainage pipe. Okay, so their absorption is making it pretty doesn't exist because it's pouring into a pipe, and therefore the Rabbanan say it doesn't matter how long the pipe is, it can't be done. Okay, and Rav Zera and Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov says no, as long as there's the right area, it's okay because he holds it's not about beautification, it's about absorption. Okay, now the Gemara is going to ask a question. So what forced Rav Zera to understand our Mishnah in this fashion? So the Gemara says, "Amar Rava masnisan kashise." Rava explains for Rav Zera. He says that the phrasing in our Mishnah was difficult. My area detani. We're at 88b2. Chatzar shipchusa. Listen, why is the opening line in our Mishnah say that a courtyard which is less than 4 amos? Okay, listening chatzar she'ein ba arba amos al arba amos. It should have said like the Brisa said 4 amos by 4 amos. The fact that it just said 4 amos. It must be that our Mishnah, the opening line of our Mishnah, even though it doesn't say attributed to anyone, it must be going like the view of Eliezer ben Yaakov, okay, which is that it's just a matter of absorption. Okay, so Shema, because it doesn't say 4 by 4, it just says 4, meaning
it doesn't say that means that it doesn't have to be.
Correct. Shema mina. Okay. But now the Gemara asks, "How many say for Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Reisha la Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov." Wait, if the opening line of the Mishnah, if the later line, we say later on in the Mishnah, it says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says. Okay. Now remember, the opening line in the Mishnah it was attributed to nobody. Okay, and then it comes along and it says pouring water into a pipe. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says this. Chacham say this. But if later on it says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov explicitly, so presumably early on in the Mishnah, it's not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. In other words, it's strange like that it doesn't say his name initially and it only says his name later on. It almost sounds like it's not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the opening line, because why else do you only mention his name later on? It seems a little strange. So Gemara says like this: Kula Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Really, the way to read the Mishnah, it's all Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. V'chasure mechzera, and it's missing words. B'chik and this is the way to read the Mishnah. Chatzur shibchusa me'arba amos. If a courtyard is less than 4 amos, Ein shofchen l'socha mayim b'Shabbos, then you're not allowed to pour water into it on Shabbos. Ha'arba amos shofchen, but if it's 4 amos, even if it's not 4 by 4, you're allowed to pour water into it on Shabbos. Okay, sure. Why? And then the words now change a little bit. Instead of saying Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, we added just the letter shin. Sher Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. In other words, now it's saying because Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says, which means we're explaining the opening line. Opening line says it has to be 4 amos. And then it explains why is that? Because Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says biv hakamor, that a drainage conduit which is covered 4 amos b'shus ram, 4 amos in the public domain, shofchen l'socha mayim b'Shabbos, you're allowed to pour water into it on Shabbos. In other words, again, the question was, hey, it says Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov later on in the Mishnah. That means he wasn't the one speaking earlier. The Gemara says no, he was the one speaking earlier. The opening line says you can only pour into a courtyard that has 4 amos. Because Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says, now it's one long continuous statement, as opposed to the way we originally read it, which was, you can't pour into a courtyard, and Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says. Now we're saying, no, the first line is being explained by the second line. We know Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov's view explicitly about the pipe, and that is explaining the open line, why it has to be 4 amos.
So there's no argument. Everybody would agree with him.
No, then the Chachamim come along, meaning the Mishnah continues. Chacham say, no, it has to be 100 amos long. Even if it's 100 amos long, it doesn't work. So clearly they're disagreeing with the opening line as well.
So opening with the whole Mishnah, they're disagreeing with.
They're disagreeing with the whole Mishnah. They would say, if it's 4 by 4, it'd be a different story. But yeah, they're arguing with the opening line of the Mishnah. Yeah, correct. Right? In other words, opening line of the Mishnah says it has to be 4 amos. Implication, any 4 amos is fine. 16 by, whatever, any dimension is going to be okay. And then the Mishnah continues and explains why is that so? Because it's based on the view of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says that it's about absorption and not about beautification. Okay, meaning that Chacham would disagree to that opening line. Okay.
That would be a little weird. Most of the time, attribute from the beginning who it's according
correct.
to.
It doesn't read perfectly. Correct. Okay. Says the Gemara further. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer biv hakamor. Okay, so if you have a drainage pipe that's covered. Okay, so the Gemara says masnis, and then the Chachamim said the Chacham who said you can't pour it into the drainage pipe said if you pour it on the roof, then it's going to be okay, right? They said you pour it onto the roof, and then it falls into the drainage pipe. That's enough steps removed, and that's going to be allowed. Right? That was the view of the Chachamim. Yeah. So Gemara says, "Masnis lo Chananya." However, this Mishnah does not go like Chananya. Why the Tanya Chananya? There's three views. The Tanya Chananya, Omer Chananya is the most stringent. Again, Eliezer ben Yaakov said you can pour it directly into the drainage pipe. The Chum said you have to pour it onto the roof. And then we have Chananya Omer Afilu Gag Mea Ama. Even if it's a roof 100 amos, Lo Yishroch, you can't pour it onto the roof. Lefisha Ena Gag Asa Livloa El Lekalech. A roof is made not to absorb, but rather to flow. And therefore, even if it's indirect, at the end of the day, you're pouring it into the pipe. Just because I poured it first onto the roof and then it fell down, that's not enough of a. The bottom line is you're still pouring it into the pipe because a roof is made. It's not like you poured it onto something which is not made to absorb, not made to flow, and then it happens to flow into the drainage pipe. Pouring on a roof is made slanted and drained so that it drains immediately. So it's not like you did something separate. It's like you're just using a long bucket. By pouring it onto the roof, the Chanana says it's still going to be usher. Okay.
What if you have a garden on your roof?
Then you definitely can't. Well, okay, you're saying then I'm pouring it. Well, then you have other issues because then you're planting. Yeah. Okay. Tana. Now the Gemara qualifies this whole need for a cesspool in a small chatzor. Tana b'medvar murim. When is this halacha so? Bimosa chama in the summer. In the summer, a person needs to have, then we have to have a cesspool. Aval mosa kashamim. In the winter, shofech v'shonav and a person's allowed to pour endlessly, even if they don't have a cesspool, right? Although they don't have to pour in a cesspool, there's no problem. My taima. What's the reason? We're going to see two similar reasons. Amarava. Adam rotze shibalu mayim imkoman. A person. It says literally like once, but the point is the person doesn't mind if there's water absorbed into their place in the winter. Now, you and I I just walked outside through some rain. I don't want my backyard to be all muddy. Back in the day, in the winter, like forget about it. It was an absolute mud pool. It was just like an absolute mess. They didn't have the best drainage. Even nowadays even our yards have proper drainage. There's all the different laws about how much yard you have to have per the rain. Back in the day, you walked outside, it was just a muddy mess. That was the reality. Okay, and we have a couple of lechos that reflected that. But the bottom line is, in the winter, a person doesn't care that water gets absorbed into their place, and therefore, in the winter, I don't need a cesspool because there, I'm pouring it into my yard, and I don't I'm fine with my yard absorbing and absorbing and absorbing. In the winter, I don't want it to absorb so much because I want to keep my yard dry. I want to be able to walk on a dry yard. Okay, so in the winter though, I don't need to have a cesspool because a person just pours into the yard and they're fine. They're okay with the yard being filled up with mud because that's just the reality. The reality is, there is mud everywhere. Okay, so Amalei Abai says very shofchen. At the end of the day, the Mishnah that talked about sewage being poured into a long drainage pipe, dadam rotza shibalu. Okay, and that a person wants it to absorb. In other words, the person does not care for it to go all the way into Rosh Hashanah. The person wants they're totally fine with the water pipe absorbing. Okay, Viktani lo yishboch, and the Mishnah said it can't be poured. Okay, meaning like this. The Mishnah said that when I pour water into a drainage pipe, according to the Chachamim, I can't do so. According to the Chachamim, I can't pour directly into a drainage pipe. I have to pour into my roof to get into a drainage pipe. Right? Then again, the Mishnah had two things. One was a cesspool, right? Just absorbing, and one was a drainage pipe. The Mishnah said, so you're telling me now, in the winter, I'm allowed to pour it into it. Why? Because I don't care for it to be there. I don't care that it keeps on absorbing. It's fine. It does. That's totally fine. So why in a drainage pipe, which is very large, which is going to absorb? I'm fine with my drainage pipe absorbing. In other words, if I had a drainage pipe in my,
What do you mean absorbing? It's not going to absorb.
Part of it's going to go down, but it's a very large drainage pipe, and meaning it's true. It's on a slant, and part of it's going to run off. But at the end of the day, if you ask me, do I care if it absorbs over here? I don't care. I just don't want it here, but I'm pouring into the drainage pipe. It's a big drainage pipe. It's going to absorb some of it, meaning the drainage pipe itself, we're thinking of a metal drainage pipe. I don't know, it's an earthenware drainage pipe. It's going to absorb, it's going to hold on to some of it. If it would, I wouldn't care, meaning there's nothing it's true, technically it's going to let the waters out. In the winter also, my small yard is also going to let the waters out, right? But the point is, since I don't care if the water stays here, it's not a problem. Here too, if it's a large drainage pipe, that it could hold a lot of water. Let's say you have let's say the drainage pipe is blocked up. It's a 100 amma drainage pipe and it's blocked up for a little bit. Do you care? No, because at the end of the day, it's a big drainage pipe. As long as it's not overflowing back on me, I don't care if it would be picking up water. It doesn't bother me. And therefore, you should be able to pour into it. Why does the Mishnah say, according to the Chachamim, I can't pour into this drainage pipe? So Amrle, Hasam l'may nechoshle. He says, no, wait. In the case of the courtyard, the small courtyard, what is the concern? Okay, imishum kilkul, and we're going to point out there's really two concerns every time I pour into a yard. Imishum kilkul chatzero, if the concern is that my courtyard is going to be ruined, hamikankal kaima. In the rainy season, my courtyard's already ruined. Vimishum gezera, and if the concern is shema yomru tzinoro shel ploni mikalech mayim, and if they say that the person's gutter is streaming water, some tzinoros mikalchem heim. Most gutters are streaming rainwater the entire winter, and therefore there's no issue if I'm pouring into a small courtyard. I don't need to have a cesspool. Why? Because first of all, the person is happy. Don't tell me that the person is intending for the water to go out into Rosh Hashanah. It's not true. I'm perfectly fine with water falling here because my courtyard's a mess already. So I'm perfectly fine with all the waste and everything pouring into my yard. And if you're going to tell, and therefore when it goes out into Rosh Hashanah, it's not my intention because I'm perfectly fine with it here because my yard's a mess already. Right? And if the concern is that water is draining out and people seeing it are going to say, oh, the guy's pouring water into the Rosh Hashanah, water during the winter is constantly pouring out. Water is draining all the time because it's a rainy season. Okay. Whereas in the case of the conduit, okay, there is what happens is there is a prohibition, and when is the prohibition? Now Rav is actually qualifying for us. There's a prohibition in the dry season to go ahead and pour water. When the Chum said you can't pour water, it was specifically referring to the dry season. You can't pour water into there. Why? Because at the end of the day, it looks like you're pouring water directly into the Shus Rabbim, which is effectively what you're doing. You're pouring into there, and granted, you're okay with it absorbing. But in terms of the gzera that people say, am I pouring water into it right now? The answer is yes. Someone's watching water coming out. They'll say, oh, you just poured water into it. In the summer, there's no water coming from elsewhere. It's because you poured water, and people will say, oh, I poured water into it on Shabbos. Okay? Meaning,
you still have the opinion that says that if it's covered, it's okay.
this is really Ezra ben Yaakov. It's water, it's waste, it's everything. It's water and waste and everything. In other words, there's stuff coming out. There's stuff coming out. So again, basically the way Rav is interpreting this in the Mishnah now is he just qualified the Mishnah as well. He basically was forced to qualify the Mishnah and say that when the Mishnah said, when the Chachamim said you can't pour water into that drainage pipe on Shabbos, it's specifically in the summer. Right? In the summer, why? Because people see water coming in, they'll say, oh, person's pouring water directly into Rosh Hashanah. That can't be done. Okay, whereas in the winter, no one's going to suspect that you're pouring water. No one will say, oh, the person's pouring water into... It's not because you're actually pouring water into Rosh Hashanah. It's that people think that you're deliberately and wanting to pour water into Rosh Hashanah. If you were to ask the person, do you care for the water to go into Rosh Hashanah, or are you okay with it staying in the pipe? Say, I'm fine with it staying in the pipe. It's just that it looks like you're pouring directly into Rosh Hashanah with intention to go into Rosh Hashanah. So in the winter, no one's going to come to that wrong conclusion. In the summer, you'd be allowed to... in the winter, no one's going to come to that conclusion. In the summer, people will come to that conclusion, and therefore it can't be done in the summer. That's how Rav is going to interpret it. Rav Nachman says it differently, but most like Hashamim. In the rainy season, uka machzik sasayim. A cesspool contains 2 sa, no snala sasayim. You're allowed to pour 2 sa of water into the courtyard. Machzik sa, if the cesspool contains only a sa, no snala sa, you're allowed to pour a sa of water. Mimosachama, in the summer days, machzik sasayim. If it contains 2 sa, no snala sasayim, then you're allowed to pour 2 sa of water. Sa, if it contains 1 sa in the summer, ain't no snala kol ikri. You can't pour anything at all. Okay? Says the Gemara, why is that? If it's able to hold a sa of water, why can't you put a sa of water in it? The Gemara says, the concern is that since 2 sa is the normal amount that a person puts in, when a person puts 2 sa is the normal amount that a person uses every day. Therefore, in the summer, you can't put 2 sa. You can't even put 1 sa into the cesspool because there's a concern you're going to go overboard since that's the normal water usage. Ask the Gemara, so why in the rainy season are you not allowed to put more? Okay, why in the rainy season are you allowed to put, why are you allowed to put the cesspool, put 2 sa in the 2 sa one, 1 sa in the 1 sa one? Okay, so the Gemara says, what is the concern in the rainy season? Imishum kilkol, if the concern is that it's going to get ruined by the extra water, again, the courtyard's already ruined. Imishum gzera, and if the concern is that people are going to say, the person's pouring extra water directly into the public domain, they'll say, okay, people are going to say, oh, it's streaming water, and that's an issue. So stam tinoros mekalchen hein. In the winter, they're always streaming water. Okay, and therefore, in the summer, and that's what the Brisa came to say. The Brisa was coming to tell us that that it wasn't coming to say you could pour directly into the ground. What it was saying was as follows. What the Brisa was saying is that in the winter, it doesn't matter how big your cesspool is. You can use the cesspool, and you're not afraid of anyone coming to any wrong conclusions because not afraid of it. Of anyone coming to wrong conclusions because the drains are always draining. Whereas in the summer, the regular 2 sa sa cesspool a person's allowed to use, because 2 sa is what a person usually uses over a Shabbos. 1 sa can't be used at all because there's a concern a person is going to use the regular amount, and fine. Whereas in the winter, a person is allowed to use the 1 sa 1, and we're not afraid of any people coming to the wrong conclusions, because anyways the waters are streaming on their own. Amar Abaye therefore says, Hilkach afilu karva afilu karayim, if you have, since any unintentional runoff in the rainy season is not going to cause any issues, meaning it's not going to cause the chutzner to be ruined because the person doesn't care for there to be water in their courtyard, and no one's going to come to any wrong conclusions because the gutters are always flowing. Therefore, not only you're allowed to pour any amount into the cesspool in the winter, because there's no negative impact that's going to possibly come out of it. Again, you don't care that your courtyard is getting ruined, and we're not afraid of anyone coming to the wrong conclusions, because at the end of the day, water is flowing out of the gutters all the time, and therefore don't say only you can pour a sa or sasayim. You're allowed to pour a core, which is a much larger amount. We'll finish the parak, God willing, tomorrow.
In this case, you wouldn't have a